It was a late Sunday afternoon, the kind where the house felt too quiet, too staged. I was folding laundry when the doorbell rang. It was Ryan, my neighbor's 22-year-old son. He held a worn paperback in his hand, one I had lent him months ago after a casual chat about Dostoevsky over the fence. He looked slightly awkward, unsure whether to enter or just hand it off, but I invited him in. My husband, Mark, had left early that morning for a business trip. Again, lately, he left more often than he stayed, and when he was home, we were more like roommates than lovers. Ryan stepped inside, eyes darting nervously, then softening. We sat in the living room. At first, we talked about the book. Then the conversation wandered. His graduation plans, his uncertainty about life, my thoughts on passion and purpose. What began as casual turned uncomfortably intimate when he asked, "Did you ever feel stuck, like life was a script you didn't write?" I stared at him too long. That question wasn't from a book, that was my life. Mark and I hadn't made love in months. Our conversations were mostly logistical. Bills, schedules, repairs. I didn't remember the last time someone looked at me like I mattered. Then he said something that fractured my composure. "You always seemed like someone who had more to give than anyone noticed." I didn't know what possessed me, but I reached out, just to touch his hand, just to feel warmth, but he didn't pull away. The stillness in the room became its own language. He leaned in slowly, as if waiting for permission that neither of us could voice. When his lips touched mine, it wasn't lust. It was grief and hunger and guilt. I pulled back, breathless, ashamed. But the moment had already crossed its boundaries. "I should go," he said, and left without waiting for me to respond. The door closed. The room felt heavier than before. I wasn't in love with Ryan. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but in that moment he had seen me, not as a mother, a wife, or a neighbor, but as a woman. Over the next few weeks, nothing happened between us again. But everything had changed. My marriage felt colder. I realized how desperately I craved connection, not because I was weak, but because I was forgotten. I confessed to Mark, not about the kiss, but about the distance between us. He didn't yell, he just sighed and said, "I knew you were lonely. I just didn't know how lonely." We started couples therapy, but healing isn't linear. The emotional betrayal had already burrowed deep. Ryan moved out a month later to attend grad school. We never spoke of that day again. But every now and then, I think about how easy it is to fall. Not for someone, but for the idea that you still matter to someone. Infidelity doesn't always announce itself with fireworks or scandal. Sometimes it begins in the unnoticed absences between two people who once shared everything. In a long-term relationship, emotional erosion is subtle, like a ceiling leak that leaves no puddle, only quiet damage. The silence that once felt comfortable begins to turn into distance. There are no fights, no cruelty, only a slow fading of curiosity and care. You begin to feel like a supporting character in your own life, especially when your partner, like Mark, becomes consumed by career, deadlines, and obligations. You don't even blame them. Not at first. You understand life gets complicated, but over time, the conversations turn transactional. "Did you pay the bills?" replaces "How do you feel today?" And soon you stop even offering pieces of your inner world, because you assume they're not listening. It's in this emotional drought that even a casual connection feels amplified. Ryan, my neighbor's son, wasn't someone I ever viewed as anything but a boy I watched grow up next door. But the day he asked if he could borrow a book, I noticed something unusual. He looked at me with full attention, the kind I hadn't received in years. Not flirtation, just presence. That's how emotional substitution begins, not with intent, but with attention. It wasn't about youth or attraction. It was about being noticed, being listened to. When you are emotionally starved, even a drop of understanding feels like nourishment. I didn't see it as dangerous. I saw it as comforting. There's a peculiar guilt that comes with longing, not for sex, but for connection. You don't want to betray your partner, but you start to feel betrayed by your own isolation. You wonder if you're being dramatic. You tell yourself it's nothing, just a conversation, but somewhere inside, you already know you're giving away pieces of yourself that your partner stopped asking for. You know your smile means more to this outsider than it does to the person you share a bed with. And that realization hits hard. It didn't happen all at once. It was a buildup of tiny moments. When Ryan returned the book, he stayed for tea. We spoke of dreams, fears, and art. Not once did we mention relationships, but the undercurrent was there. When he asked if I ever felt stuck in my life, I almost cried. Not because of the question, but because no one had asked me that in years. And that's where the danger lies. Not in seduction, but in empathy. When someone outside your relationship mirrors your pain without judgment, it creates intimacy, and intimacy, even emotional, becomes a substitute for love. I didn't go looking for infidelity. I went searching for my own reflection. I wanted to feel alive, seen, relevant, not in a grand, romantic way, but in a quiet, human one. When emotional silence becomes a daily reality, even the smallest flicker of connection can feel like fire. And when you've been cold for too long, you'll reach out, even if it burns. When that flicker of connection starts to feel warmer than the life you've built with someone, the mind begins crafting justifications you never thought yourself capable of. You start telling yourself it's harmless. You convince yourself it's just conversation, a compliment, a lingering look, and yet the guilt quietly builds alongside the excitement. But it's not the physical that hurts the most. It's the emotional shift. It's realizing that you're more honest in your secrets than you are in your shared truths. You begin to say things to this outsider that you've stopped saying to your partner, not because you're hiding, but because you've given up hope that your partner still wants to hear them. And that's when boundaries start to blur. It wasn't the kiss that destroyed me. It was everything that led up to it. It was the eye contact held just a second too long. The pause after a compliment that made my stomach flutter in a way I hadn't felt in years. It was the way Ryan listened, not distracted, not waiting for his turn to speak, but with genuine curiosity, as if every word I said held value. In those moments, the emotional intimacy I had shared with Mark for over a decade had been replaced by something new and terrifying. Ryan hadn't earned it, but he had stepped into a space that had been left empty for far too long. I knew what was happening, even as I denied it. The emotional connection was growing roots beneath our casual interactions. And still, I let it happen. Because when you've been emotionally disconnected for so long, vulnerability with someone else starts to feel more authentic than the guarded silence in your relationship. You stop seeing your marriage as sacred and start seeing it as something suspended in routine. You become two people playing roles, husband and wife, without feeling the intimacy that made those roles real. And when someone offers you an emotional truth, unfiltered and unexpected, it feels like a mirror being held up to everything you're missing. What made it worse was that it didn't feel like betrayal at the time. It felt like rescue. That's the most dangerous part. I wasn't looking to cheat. I was looking to be reminded that I was still human, still desired, still relevant, and Ryan, young, idealistic, emotionally present, became the symbol of everything I had buried. When he touched my hand, when he leaned in, it wasn't about sex. It was about recognition. The worst part is, I let it happen because it felt honest, more honest than the quiet resentment I felt every morning when Mark barely acknowledged me over coffee. And after it happened, I didn't feel empowered. I felt broken, because I had crossed a line not with my body, but with my heart. I had given a part of myself to someone who hadn't earned it, simply because the person who didn't want it anymore. The kiss was brief, but the emotional betrayal lingered. It haunted me in ways I couldn't admit, not even to myself, because when secrets start feeling more real than your marriage, you're no longer cheating on your partner. You're cheating on your own sense of self.